You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy.
Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jefferson Smith sitting in for Tom. Tom is sick, and so might be the nation. The call-in number today is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925, and Sweet Home Alabama indeed, but for whom? As you probably already have heard, or may already have heard, the state of Alabama has voted now for the most extreme anti-abortion law in the nation. There is no exception in this law for rape or incest or death of the mother or life of the mother. There are two intentions of this law. One is its stated intent. The second is not only its impact in Alabama, but the impact it could have on the United States of America. During this portion, we're going to talk about the reminder of why it mattered so very much that a Supreme Court seat was stolen. We're going to connect this to what's happening in the media. A little bit later on, I want to talk about Elizabeth Warren's refusal to be on Fox News, get your opinions on that, and offer my own. I want us to remember the essential arguments about why a woman's right to choose was so important in the first instance, why Roe versus Wade was so important in the first instance. I worry that this is a generation that knew not Joseph. I worry that we have forgotten a critical debate in the country and some of the most important elements of that debate, including an era of back alley abortions, significant risks to health and safety for women, subjugation of women. If we actually want full agency and full power for all human beings in our country, how this relates to that. And I worry that if we take for granted some of those arguments, if we think that all the threat, it's something that they talk about only on talk radio, it's not really going to happen in governance. We've had Roe versus Wade for so many decades now. It's going to stick. Well, days after Justice Breyer, days after Justice Brennan, days after we had liberal justices say their concerns, Justice Stevens, say their concerns about raising the alarm about the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And I will say, I thought I was not as scared about the elimination of Roe versus Wade as many with whom I share political and even strategic beliefs, because I thought that it might be a little bit like Miranda warnings. Miranda warnings not set forth in the Constitution. Miranda warnings carried forward from British common law. Miranda warnings got to the Supreme Court. Lots of people thought, this might be when Miranda warnings go away, no longer required, no longer a clear prophylactic for statements that are damaging to defendants when that statement is by the defendant themselves, no longer needed to be given to those defendants. Then it got to the Rehnquist court, and the Rehnquist court didn't get rid of Miranda warnings. And upon reflection, that didn't surprise me. If you see the Rehnquist court, if you see the modern rise of the Federalist Society Court, not merely and not primarily and not accurately as a group of people just with a different set of jurisprudential theoretics, but instead understand it as part of a political movement, a set of political operatives who are put in lifetime appointment chairs. Then you realize, well, getting rid of Miranda warnings, you'd be getting rid of one of the few cases that the vast majority of Americans can say by name. I don't know the poll numbers on recognition. If Jay Leno did his on-the-street interviews trying to make people look stupid years ago, how many people would have recognized Brown versus Board of Education? A lot of people. But Miranda warnings, anybody who's watched CSI, anybody who's watched Law & Order, everybody knows Miranda warnings. And I think that they kept Miranda warnings because if they'd gotten rid of it, it would be just so obvious that the court had moved in a direction that was coming after people's individual liberties, trying to protect corporate power, trying to protect concentration of wealth, trying to protect unfettered ability of capital to make whatever choice it chooses. I'm not calling that liberty. I'm not calling that freedom. I think that is a derogation of that word. I think that is a bastardization of that word. I am saying corporate power, the power of unfettered capital, and going after individual liberties. And so they kept Miranda warnings. And I thought, well, maybe with Roe versus Wade, it'll be similar. They won't topple Roe versus Wade. They'll keep using it as an issue to elect candidates like Donald Trump, to motivate voters who it isn't in their financial interest to have an economic policy that focuses on concentrating wealth at the very upper echelon, trying to make sure that they can maintain their right-wing church coalition for a candidate like Donald Trump, whose personal conduct and personal views don't seem, shall we say, fully in step from the lessons we might hear in a Sunday morning sermon. Then maybe they'll keep Roe versus Wade. Well, I think that Alabama might know stuff that I don't. By the way, the call-in number is 202-808-9925. I think one of you just dropped off real quick. Would love to get you back. It was not intentional. 202-808-9925 is the call-in number. Because Alabama has passed a law that is patently unconstitutional, that is patently, absurdly an undue burden on a woman's right to privacy, on a woman's right to choose, on a woman's essential liberties as defined by current Supreme Court precedent. The only way you pass that law, and by the way, if you take an oath when you are sworn into office to uphold the Constitution, unless you think the Supreme Court precedent is not the manifestation of the Constitution, you just violated your own oath. Members of the legislature in Alabama just violated their own oaths by passing this law. It only makes sense through a lens of thinking that the stealing of the Merrick Garland Supreme Court seat, that the appointment of the new Supreme Court justice to create a 5-seat right-wing majority in the Supreme Court, that, to quote the former presidential candidate, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, we will find out if that appointment was worth it. You'd only do that if you thought you had a chance, maybe more than that, to in fact make your law, rather than the current Supreme Court precedent, the law of the land. I want to talk about the Alabama law. I want to talk about why it's absurd. I want to talk about some of the fundamental arguments that we should remember from 35 years ago. We should remember from 45 years ago, when vigor around this issue was so obviously justified. It is getting justified again. It will help define this presidential race. It will help define the Supreme Court term. It will help us understand that what is happening in the United States with the rise of the right wing is a southernification of not only the Republican Party, but now an anti-majoritarian American government. We also want your calls. Call the number 202-808-9925. Yeah, fired up this morning. Alabama, not my sweet home. We love you if you call from there. We love you if you call and offer your view. What are some of the essential arguments that you think people need to remember? Why do you think they're doing this now? 202-808-9925. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. Honored to do so. And we'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We're talking about Alabama. We're talking about abortion. We're talking about women's right to choose and freedom, real freedom. We'll be right back. We're on Free Speech TV, and thank you for watching us there, and thank you for supporting your local affiliate. Thank you for supporting Free Speech TV, and thank you for supporting all of our non-commercial stations out there. Shout out to X-Ray, my home station. We love you. Was making the case that this is, yes, about the subjugation of women in Alabama, but it is also about something broader than that, that anybody voting on this would believe one of two things. Anybody voting in favor, any state legislator voting in favor of this law in Alabama would be feeling one of two things. Either that it was okay to violate the Constitution, or that they wanted to change the interpretation of the Constitution. And they wanted to make Roe versus Wade no longer the law of the land. And lest that seem not so obvious, or lest that seem like I am reaching a bit or making a leap of analysis, let's just listen to State Representative Terry Collins, Republican, who said after the vote, this bill is about challenging Roe versus Wade. I will say it again, this bill is about challenging Roe versus Wade, end quote. This is going to help define, and the timing of this, I think is very much on purpose. And it is not only the timing in the rearview mirror after the current composition of the Supreme Court was determined. It is not only a recognition that with the confirmation, not only previously confirmed Chief Justice John Roberts, not only with the older Clarence Thomas, not only with the previously confirmed Samuel Alito, now also with Brett Kavanaugh, now also with Neil Gorsuch, now also with that stolen Supreme Court seat, that there is a chance to overturn it. Not only in the rearview mirror, but also through the front glass, also through the windshield, also ahead is the election. Remember, see, they got a problem. The right wing has had a problem for a while, and that is somehow having an argument for freedom and calling the unfettered control of capital freedom. That is an odd thing. I am surprised that linguists and media and human beings and people with conscience allowed our language to get away with that. But let's put that on pause for a moment. Somehow to make that the clarion call, and by that not include the fundamental freedom for slightly more than half of the population of our country, not including essential freedoms for women. But also, they have this other challenge that they have elected a guy who was willing to sign their tax breaks, who was willing to be more extreme in his language than the other candidates so as to really keep a hold of the right-wing Fox News and right-wing radio listener base. And do that somehow by sticking with or getting the right-wing Christians to stick with him. Despite his personal conduct, personal beliefs, and lack of churchiness, And the way they do that is Roe versus Wade. We'll be back to talk about it more. I'm Jeff Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. So we are talking about Alabama. We are talking about a woman's right to choose, something we can now so clearly not take for granted, something that so clearly is not merely a line that a candidate uses to build support. I want to talk about it in the context of the upcoming presidential elections, but right now we have people patiently waiting. I want to hear from you. Janet from Bainbridge Island, Washington, a beautiful place. Janet, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing so good, and I'm so glad to get a chance to talk to you.
Janet, try to get your phone closer to your face. I can hear that when you talk, but I can't hear all your words. Janet, I apologize. So try calling back on a different telephone. We're not able to hear you. I'm going to go to Deborah in Albuquerque, New Mexico on AM 1350. Deborah, thanks so much for calling.
Jefferson, my family's originally from Alabama, and I remember when abortion became legal in Mississippi. I was living in Mississippi at the time. I was a high school dropout single mother whose husband walked out on her, and I did have an abortion because I had a child already, and I didn't know if I could take care of him without an education or job skills. Eventually, I did get my GED, and at 50 got my PhD. But I feel this law in Alabama is against poor people and minorities because a rich person will always fly somewhere and get an abortion. It's not going to affect them. It will only affect poor people, and they will have higher problems with poverty. And we're not talking about this. The Republican fascist regime has been attacking brown, black, minorities, and poor people for years, and I really believe they want the oligarchs and a caste system of poverty.
Deborah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for putting this through a lens of equality, equity, and fairness. Yes, for women, but also for people of color and also for people experiencing poverty. That any way I would agree would be merely essentially restating what you said. But I will restate it for emphasis and appreciation that a poor person doesn't have as easy a chance to take a plane and hop over somewhere to go get that, doesn't have the network of financial resources to make that as easy. Heck, in the olden days, women could fly to another country, but only rich women could afford to fly to another country. Thank you for helping us see it in that lens, and thanks so much for your call and your candor.
Thank you.
Craig from I'm not sure if it's El Granada or El Grenada. I'm gonna say El Granada, California. Go ahead.
You have the pronunciation correct.
Thank you, sir.
My name's Craig Mead, like the lake M-E-A-D.
And like the beverage?
And also like the back of all your school papers, you remember the Mead Paper Company.
I do remember the Mead Paper Company.
And I was a law clerk for a retired federal judge. I have a background, 40-year background, undefeated litigator, and I've also written law that passed unanimously. And when I look at Roe v. Wade, I also grew up in an all-girl family, and I was also adopted, so I want to say for the record, being an adopted person, you come predisposed to be pro-life, but also growing up in an all-girl family, you come predisposed to realizing every person in America, as far as I know, and I've worked at the Supreme Court level, as far as I know, every person in America has a right to control their destiny and their body. And when we take that right away, we are in fundamental violation of many things in the Constitution, and we try to make logical choices and say, well, an embryo has a heartbeat or whatever, and so doesn't this life form also have a choice? And we can also go into the conflicts made when someone says, I'm a family values person. And when we look at the Republicans, many laws that are being passed, the way people are living today, and you say, well, if you're a family value person, why aren't we feeding kids in school? Why aren't we taking care of pregnant women who are really alive, and don't their lives matter? And so we can go into a long debate about who is right here. And I suggest the Constitution provides ample framework for us to say that every person in America, especially citizens and free men and women, have a right to control their bodies. And I think an amendment to the Constitution is the first step to enshrining Roe v. Wade so that women never have to worry about this again. And the second thing, being a presidential candidate, and I'm not going to get into all those policies, but I looked at this and I said on day one, the first thing the federal government could do, or any progressive federal government, is say, women, if you're in a state that has these sort of laws and problems, we have a national Medicare system. Yeah, as we all have heard, we call it Medicare for all. I call it free universal health care, no copay, no problems. And if you're a woman in a state like this, I think the federal government should step up to the plate and say, you go down to your local airline, you show them your maternity slip that says, your OBGYN says you're pregnant, and you go there and you get a first-class ticket, federal government paid, to a state that doesn't have a problem with it. You go and have the counseling that every woman, I think, should have before that, whether it's with a physician, and say, are you sure you want to do this? You don't want to look at adoption, but you have a right. And you go through that counseling, and if you want to go see some cleric or some priest, that's on you while you're there in that city. Maybe take 24 hours to think about it. Come back the next day, and if you say, no, I want to go forward with this child would be negatively impacted. I'm concerned about overpopulation. I'm concerned that I'm a teenager. Whatever the reason is, I'm a woman. I have control over my body. Then the federal government pays for it in the other state. You fly back home first class. Federal government pays for all those hotel bills for women. And I think we owe that to the women who we all have to remember. This country and adopted kids and all of the great technology we have, everything we have would not exist if it wasn't for the women, the mothers, in our life. We got to take care of them as equal citizens that have every right to control their bodies. That's my personal position on all of this.
Craig, thank you so much. And roughly speaking, my personal position too, that the fact that a nearly entirely white male crew of state legislators would think that they are in the best position to evaluate the balancing of the interests and the fundamental freedoms and what equity, equality, fairness, freedom, morality should mean with the most essential functions and choices that women have to make is absurd, is itself deeply misogynist. I appreciate your call very much. We're going to be back with your calls, and also really would love to hear from women who have perspective on this. 202-808-9925. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. It's a serious day. 202-808-9925.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's be clear about something. Let us be crystal clear about at least something. The fact that the Alabama law does not have an exception for rape or incest, the fact that the abortion law allows for, would prohibit a woman from having an abortion, even in a case of incest. Let us be clear what that means. Incest in the United States does not mean Cersei and Jaime Lannister. It does not mean some troubling but nonetheless romanticized thing on television. It doesn't mean Jonah from Veep. It doesn't mean some video on the dark web or even on the not so dark web. What it means in real life is underage girls getting, and there's trigger warnings on this whole darn thing. This is a painful topic for a lot of people. By talking about it plainly, I don't mean to cause additional harm. And if you need to listen to something else, we're talking about this tough stuff, I totally get it. Most welcome you to stick with us. We will try to treat the topics with some sensitivity, but they will be tough subjects, and we will deal with the tough subjects. That we're talking about in the United States of America, when we're talking about incest, is we're essentially talking about child rape. We're talking about a 12-year-old girl who is made forcibly to have sex by a family member, by a brother, uncle, cousin maybe, and requiring that girl, not woman, that girl, young woman if you prefer, but I think they're 12, that's a girl, saying there will be penalty for you or your doctor, criminal penalty for you or your doctor, if you don't take that pregnancy to term. Let's be clear about that. This is insidious. This is immoral. This is not merely a political issue. This is a deeply important moral issue, and it is offensive. And it should offend every American. Let's take Wendy's call. Wendy, you're on from East Rockaway. Thanks for calling.
Hi, how are you? I am absolutely sick about this. All I can think of is that it amounts to forced motherhood. It's supposed to be such a wonderful and beautiful thing, and forcing someone to do it makes it very difficult for a woman to find joy in it and be able to do it the way that she wants to. I'm a mother myself. I have a 1-year-old. I'm 39. I waited till this age so that I would be able to provide a good life for him, what I deemed to be, a good life. I waited to develop my career and make enough money so that I could buy a house with my husband and have all of the things that we wanted to in order to, provide a good home for a baby. And we did have an abortion back in the day. We did, because it was not the right time. If we had been forced to go through with it at that point, I don't know how happy we would be. I mean, yes, every child is wonderful. We should celebrate every life, all of that business. But I really am so glad that I was able to wait. And it makes me so sad and hurt and angry that there are other women out there who would have to essentially stop their lives because someone else is making the decision for them.
Yeah, because some politicians in Alabama want to build power on the backs of women in their state, and want to force the Supreme Court to make a decision about changing the interpretation of the Constitution to force that same choice in legislature across the country.
They also just can't handle the fact that there are so many women, who are excelling and doing so. And I believe that Roe v. Wade is one of the things that actually made that possible. The reason why you have more women in the workplace, the reason why you have more women who are, successful beyond the dreams of our grandmothers, for goodness sake. Abortion rights is what gave us the ability to say, okay, no, wait a second here. We're going to be able to plan our lives out so that we can have our cake and eat it too, have the career, and then have the family if we choose to.
This was, Wendy, this was the thing that I was too insensitive to as a younger person, right? Like I knew sort of what my politics were. I still, I wouldn't have disagreed with anything you said, but it really wasn't until, probably my relation with my own wife, and when it dawned on me a little more deeply, where I felt it a little bit more passionately, and even the depth of that feeling happening even more recently, that to just parrot what you said, that we can't have we can't bend the arc of history towards justice. We can't have fundamental equality and we can't understand if we don't address this issue. If women do not have rights over their own bodies, and we can't understand the abortion debate if we don't understand it through a lens of feminism, through a lens of equality, through a lens of bending the arc of history toward justice, and through a lens of exactly what you were saying, was a chance for women to have full agency, full control, not only of that choice, but generally being able to shape their own lives. That we have to make sure women are not merely concubines of the state, and that dudes aren't making critical and all important decisions. I couldn't agree with you more, and I so appreciate you calling. Please go ahead.
The fact that there's anyone out there making it sound as though the choice and actually going through with an abortion is some sort of light decision is, I think, the thing that really makes me the angriest. Yeah. It's something that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of reflection.
How hard was it for you?
Oh my God, it was hard, but we both knew that it was the right thing to do. I think that we were both kind of coming to the heights of our careers and realized, like, no, if we want to actually have a family, we need to do this the right way. And that was a very difficult decision. We couldn't tell anybody, and then only very, very few friends could we even mention it to. So, there wasn't a lot of support there because of it. But as we got older, or as I got older anyway, I opened up to a few more people, and I started to see, just how many people around me went through the same thing, and how there are so many of us who decided to wait till we were in our mid to late 30s, and some of us who were even deciding to wait a little bit longer. It's such a taboo thing. It's such a scary thing. It's a hard thing to talk about. But, maybe the only thing that may come of this that's positive is the fact that it'll get people talking. I'm calling a radio show, for goodness sake, and saying, very, very personal things that I can't even tell my parents, because it is so important. And I think that maybe if we talked about it a little bit more, it would be easier for women to stand up for themselves and for the men around them to stand up as well.
And for people to sort of be willing to have courage that they might otherwise lack because they thought the courage previously wasn't as necessary.
Yes, it's hard. But you know what? Thank goodness there's enough men out there as well who are truly understanding of this and supportive of, the sisters and cousins and wives and girlfriends around them, because, it takes women have to support each other, but men have to support the women as well.
If you had a chance to talk and with a member of the Alabama legislature and recognize that there are other legislators in other states who would jump at the chance to vote in the same way that Alabama legislators did. I live on the West Coast. I still know that former colleagues of mine in the legislature, there are more than a half a dozen who would almost certainly jump at the chance to vote alongside. This is not only an Alabama problem. But if you had a chance to sit down with one of these Alabama legislators, given your own experience, Wendy, what would you want them to hear? What would you want them to understand that you think they might not understand?
I would want them to understand that they were elected to office to represent their constituents, not their own personal religious beliefs. If you believe that something was written down in a book by a deity 3,000 years ago, that's wonderful for you. But you represent many, many people, and the majority of the people in this country believe that abortion rights are women's rights and health rights. It goes beyond just the physical health. It goes to mental health. It goes to so many aspects. And any lawmaker who thinks that that they can impose their own views on this country is a reason for them not to hold the office, and they should be voted out. If they really listen to what the majority of the country wants, that's really what they should be doing as lawmakers.
Wendy, thank you so much for being willing to call. I know that, you said that it was not only a challenging thing to do, but a challenging thing to talk about, and appreciate you so much for being willing to address that challenge.
And if we can just say, and I will say it again, it amounts to forced motherhood.
Yeah.
It should not be forced. You should do it by choice.
Wendy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
The call-in number is 202-808-9925. I know that, when I was in law school, there were articles written about how men were more likely to raise their hand in law school class, which ended up having an impact on people's achievement. That can be true in talk radio, too. Really want to encourage women to call the program. I'll try not to mansplain too much. 202-808-9925. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show, 202-808-9925. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in Alabama. Jeez. Lewis from Salisbury, you are on the air. You win the Most Patient Listener Award. Go ahead.
Jeff, I am outraged at what our Alabama is trying to do to our women, our sisters. You know, just to think that you got a man who can rape a woman and she got to carry that child. Knowing it's already difficult, knowing it's whatever they're going through, I can't even imagine, nor the pain that they have to go through to bear a child. But just for someone to say that person have to take that child and look at it, you might love it, that is just absurd. You know what? I think Alabama women, who I am sticking with Alabama women because I love my wife, I love my mother, I love my daughters. And the only one who's going to really actually be affected by this are the same ones I just mentioned. You know, there is a remedy for my Alabama sisters. All they have to do is get together and make sure they pass a law that if any man commits any sexual crime to any woman, if that woman has to carry that child, they should be castrated. And then we don't have to worry about that repeating again and again by the same individual. Now, let's see if the men will love that law when they have to do something to alter their body as well. I think it's just bizarre. It's carnage. They act like they forgot that sometimes when you walk by a garbage can, you smell the flesh of a baby because they couldn't have a legal abortion, so they don't understand. They just make laws and think it's going to be right. I thought that white people was worried about they would become a minority at 2050. If this continued to happen, they would be a minority at 2021. This is totally ridiculous for them to talk two sides of their necks. I don't understand it.
Well, Lewis, I appreciate the call. And I will say that one of my concerns of this is that violent lawmaking encourages some portion of each of us to want to respond with additional violent lawmaking. What I am hoping is that we will, in fact, embrace freedom not as a lie, not as a line for concentrated application of power by oligarchs, but in fact as freedom for human beings. And that has to start with women and, yes, people of color and people who are most impacted by the subjugation of concentrated power.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, man, I love the show, and I hope more women do call in, but I want Alabama women to know I'm with you. And every man should stand up, and who is not a child molester, who's not a rapist, should stand up with our women, because nobody have the right to tell them to do anything with their body, just like nobody have the right to tell me what I can do with my body.
Lewis, thank you so much for calling.
Hey, appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you.
Good work.
All right. How much time we got? We got 15 seconds, which is not time enough to take another call right now. is enough time to say thank you so much. Thank you to the people who've already called. Thank you to the people who are calling in. We're sticking with this topic for a while. This is a defining topic. I recognize that it is not a place where enough people will be able to be persuaded off of their current view. I recognize that. I also recognize that's one of the reasons why the right wing wants to bring up this topic now, to get people to be willing to come out and vote for an otherwise immoral president. But this is a time to understand the depth of the importance. 202-808-9925. We'll be back. We're back. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Anita from San Antonio, thank you so much for calling.
Hi, Jefferson. I've been listening to the men call and the women call, and the men always seem to go to these women who are raped or victims of incest, where, almost like they have to make the woman some sort of victim, some sort of innocent victim for her to be able to make that choice about her own body. If a woman is a willing participant and she is sexually active, then somehow she should be slut-shamed. I mean, I don't understand why we always have to go to this incest or rape thing. Women should be able to control their own bodies. And I listened to that woman, and she was the most compelling to me, where she talked about how she decided at 39 to have her child because and she'd had an abortion before, because she knew that they could not, she wanted to provide the most for her child, and she knew they weren't prepared before that, and she wanted to continue her career. And I understand that. I mean, I know lots of women, and myself included, who had to make that decision because we were not prepared financially or emotionally to have a child. And it really bothers me when I hear men go right to the rape, the incest, and that's terrible. It's compelling. It's sad, and that should never happen. A 12-year-old girl should never be forced to give birth to a rapist, or if they're a victim of incest or for whatever reason. This is but it's not the typical story of why a woman gets an abortion. Women should be able to control their own friggin' bodies. This is an economic issue for women. This is an emotional issue for women. This is so many, we need to have autonomy over our own bodies, regardless of whether we're victims or we are willing participants.
And the extreme case can demonstrate how extreme the law is, but I hear you saying that the broader impact is not only in the extreme case, and not primarily in the extreme case. The broader impact is whether or not women, I like to use the word frigging. I think it's a very appropriate moment to use the word frigging, but for women to control their own bodies in all circumstances.
Exactly. And if this were men, if men could get pregnant, we would not be arguing about whether they were victims. This would not be an argument. We would not be debating this. This would just be, drive-through abortions.
Have you had... I'm struggling with a couple of things. I'm not struggling with my own views on the issue, but I'm struggling with a couple of things. One is there a pathway for growing consensus building around your, and I'll say our, viewpoint? Is it merely that, is there any, let me put it this way, is there anything that you think that the Fox News viewer, that the Rush Limbaugh listener, that the Alabama supporter of this law is missing in the analysis? Is there anything that you wish they would understand that they don't understand now? One could just say, no, people understand stuff. They just have to be outvoted. They need to be outnumbered. We need to empower women, empower people, persuade enough people or motivate enough people already persuaded. But I wonder, Anita, is there anything you would like a supporter of some of these Alabama legislators to understand that you think that they miss?
No, I don't think they can be persuaded. Yeah. I think this is about controlling women. This is about white male supremacy. This is what this is all about, and this is the way they can control us. They've been controlling us. If it wasn't for, Griswold and then Roe v. Wade, they would still be controlling women. This is what has given us the ability, like the one of the callers said, the ability to pursue our own dreams and you know, our own goals and have our own autonomy and be able to have our own lives separate from men. And they can't handle that. This is all about white male supremacy, once again, just like everything else that's going on right now.
Yeah, I agree. Anita, thank you so much. Anything else you wanted to say?
No, that's it. But thank you, Jefferson. Great show.
Appreciate you. Let's go to Denise in Calumet. How you doing, Denise? I hope I pronounced Calumet correctly.
Yes, you did. I wish the Alabama people that are making this law could have seen what I had to see many, many years ago while I was working, and it was when I was in Colorado. And it was, I was called to the emergency room. I'm a respiratory therapist, to try to resuscitate a non-viable fetus that was found near a garbage can. And there was nothing more horrible in my career of 40 years that was than trying to resuscitate a non-viable baby. There was no opening to the mouth yet. There was no, I mean, and the thing about it is that men can take a little blue pill, and if they're 99 years old and still have a good swimmer, they can still impregnate a woman. You know what I'm saying? Men can control their bodies, but yet a woman can't control hers. And if these Alabama men, I don't think if they saw what I saw, I don't think they would care. They're just so outrageously against women. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that it seems, and Anita's call was similar, and in at least this point, that we can't understand. I don't think we can, as a country, understand this set of questions if we don't see it first through a lens of equal rights for women, for agency for women, for self-determination for all human beings. That if we think only about, as Anita said, if we think only about the extreme case, if we think only about the act of abortion, if we don't think about it through the context of women's life, I agree so much, and I'll try to come from a place of humility in that agreement. That we can't understand it if we don't see it through that lens. But Denise from Calumet, thank you so much for calling.
Okay, thank you.
In just a minute, I want to take Tony's call. We got a couple callers from Alabama, and I want to hear from a couple people in Alabama. Also, can hear from you. We just got a couple lines open. The lines are lighting up. It's 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. I believe freedom is important. When I watch Braveheart, before Mel Gibson's heel turn, and when they yelled freedom, my white guy self got motivated. But if we care about freedom, that freedom primarily can't just be the freedom for a large corporation to do whatever it wants to do. That freedom has to be for people, for human beings. More than half of them are women.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email. every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking. He says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get him. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the 5th Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, 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 de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers try to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, who the hell do you think you are? In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, we have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it. The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1, and you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. Who do you think you all are anyway? Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. You move on down the street, said the pig. Huey started interrupting. You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty. And these pigs, they listen to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in Sweet Home, Alabama, indeed. But for whom? For people just joining us, for people who have not been paying attention to the news, Alabama has passed the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country. For people who think it is only about Alabama, understand that even people voting for this in the legislature said plainly and on the record, this is about challenging Roe versus Wade in the Supreme Court. This is about everybody in the country. This is about women and trans people who get pregnant, who might get pregnant, want to control their own lives. This is about extreme cases and cases that are not extreme. Families making choices, human beings making choices, defining the shape of their lives. This is not only about one southern state or a large handful of male legislators. This is about a movement that has taken hold of a political party in this country and a political party that's taken hold of the governmental apparatus of this country. Anybody who thinks, Alabama's weird, let's go about our day, we need to take a moment. We need to not just go about our day. Let's hear from somebody in Alabama at this moment. Tony from WCPT and Afraid of Me. Tony, go ahead, from Huntsville.
Jefferson, how you doing?
Holding up.
Man, listen, this is nuts. But they're so excited. Oh, my God. They're excited down here. This legislature is ridiculous. But listen, this is the land of Roy Moore. So if anybody's surprised, they shouldn't be. Roy Moore lost to Doug Jones because of this very issue. But remember, Roy Moore was the guy that was hanging around high schools. Remember?
Yep.
He was the guy that got banned from the mall.
Yep.
Because he was hanging around high school girls in his 30s. Remember that?
Yep.
So this is how they think. And when you think about the white supremacists down here, they think about white male genocide. And the only way they can stop it, the way they can stop the intermixing of white women with black men or Hispanic or whatever may be the case, they have to control their women. I've talked to a lot of these guys, and they're saying feminists are crazy. We got to find a way to get control of our women so that we can impregnate our women and make them hold these babies. Because they're having babies for black men. They're having babies for Mexicans. We'll be made it off the planet here in a few years. What the heck can we do to stop these women from going either to other races or to have them have our babies? But you got to understand that most of these dudes are just cowards. These are guys who call themselves being celibate from women, or I forgot the little name of the group. But these are guys who get in a position to change the laws, and now they can do to women with the law what they were cowards to do in high school. They couldn't date. Nobody wanted them. But now they got power, and they become white supremacists, or they have supremacist views. And now this thing is about, how do we get our women to have white babies? And they're going to redefine what incest is.
And I want to pick up on two things, or at least amplify two things. One is, again, seeing this through a lens of subjugation of women, and also understand it through its political timing. I mentioned this briefly previously, but understand the timing is not accidental. This was consulted prior. It was not random. Alabama has had its current legislative composition for a while. It did not merely recently turn right-wing. The members of the Republican Party in Alabama who are in the legislature did not recently form their views on this topic. So why now? Two reasons. One, because Justice Kennedy is no longer a justice. I'm not saying Justice Kennedy is any hero, but I am saying that the appointment of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, the change to now 5 arch right-wing justices, opens an opportunity. Means that when they passed this, an unconstitutional law, when they violated their oath of office — I have not read the Alabama oath of office. I would be shocked if it does not say they are to uphold the Constitution of the United States. When they did that, this will give us a chance to change the interpretation of the Constitution, because we got 5 votes in the Supreme Court. But the other is the timing looking forward. The timing is seen through the lens of the Doug Jones campaign for re-election to the U.S. Senate, when they recognize that he's a pretty well-liked guy, that if Roy Moore is the nominee, Roy Moore got defeated before. What could make Alabama voters go to the polls to support Roy Moore? What could get voters who leave the pulpit to go to the ballot box, and in the pulpit they're hearing "thou shalt not steal," and they learn a little bit more about Donald Trump finances? They hear lessons from the pulpit about how thou should not covet thy neighbor's wife, and they learn a little more about Donald Trump's personal behavior with women. When they hear from the pulpit, "thou shalt not lie," and they realize the current occupant of the White House has turned lying — I'm not going to call it an art form because it's not very artful, but it is I don't even call it expertise because it's not that hard. It is bold, but has turned it into an absurd, ridiculous level of untruthiness. They say, well, how are we still supposed to vote for this cat? We're told we're supposed to respect family values. This cat separated children from their families at the border. Why am I supposed to be motivated for this guy? If I don't have a bunch of dough, why am I that excited about all the benefits for tax cuts going to the people who are already doing really well and owning most of the stuff in the country? Why am I excited about that? Oh, wait a minute. What if the number one topic that people are talking about in Alabama, the Doug Jones election, and maybe the Roy Moore election, what if the topic that's being talked about at the pulpit is just a woman's right to choose, that they will not call that they will not even consider in that sermon the impact on freedoms for women? They will not even consider the freedoms of trans pregnant people in this country in that sermon. They will not consider the implications that has on all of our obligations to try to work for a somewhat more just, fair world. that will not be mentioned in the sermon. What will be mentioned is they got to get to the polls. Doesn't matter if the occupant of the White House is on their side. It doesn't matter if the occupant of the White House is moral. But he will agree with that Southern Baptist minister on this issue and therefore get to the polls. The timing here is important. We got calls. We're going to be taking them. I think we got one more spot, 202-808-9925. My name's Jeff Smith. I'm sitting in for Tom. This is a serious day. We are dealing with this not only as a news headline and then moving on, because if we want to correctly define freedom in this country and understand that freedom and equality are not always at odds. In fact, freedom and equality are necessary for anyone at some level to have either. And if we're going to have equality in this country, that means we have to have freedom, and human beings have to have freedom of what they do with their bodies. And it is time to sound the alarm, because it ain't just about Alabama. I'm Jeff. This is Tom's show. We're going to be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. We'll be back. Angela from Silver Springs, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So a few minutes ago, you had asked if there was anything that was missing.
Yeah.
And if you take the time out and you take the emotion out of what's going on with all this abortion stuff, it's essentially the emotion that's kicking it to the Supreme Court. And when it gets to the Supreme Court, it's actually going to divide our country into where states have their own separate walls and their own separate things, and we won't recognize the federal government. So it's shattering our country and creating some civil war. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and I wanted to ask, I know you're pretty nationwide, I want to know if Camilla or Elizabeth Warren, you know, if they were to get into office, if they're going to sign the Equal Rights Amendment. We're stuck at 35 states. We need 36. Can't we just get this through with an executive order and forget all this? I mean, we've already decided it 35, 40 years ago. It's over. So that's where I was at with both the subject of abortion and, like, how they're breaking us up.
Two great points. So, and appreciate the call and appreciate both of them. So the first, there is absolutely a strategy of divide and conquer.
Exactly.
The tax bill was also a strategy of divide and conquer by making state taxes no longer deductible in the same way. That was explicitly a move against blue states. When the Confederates, when the post-Confederacy Confederates said states' rights, what they were talking about was in fact dividing the nation. When the pre and during Confederacy Confederates were saying civil war, that was explicitly to divide the nation. Dividing the nation is a deep strand within the racist right wing, misogynist right wing within this country. It used to occupy more clearly power in multiple political parties. It has now become more embedded in a single political party. Not entirely, but largely. And that has taken root to totally control, since the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the governments in the deep South in the United States. And I merely want to amplify and appreciate your point that does not only have the effect of dividing the country, it is part of the raison d'etre. It is part of the motive. It is part of the reason in the first instance. Your other point, make your other point again, Angela.
Well, the deal is
the ERA.
We have Kamala Harris running for the presidency. We have Elizabeth Warren running for presidency. Well, I want to know if somebody will sign into law, if they make it to that seat, the Equal Rights Amendment. I know that there's parts of it that deal with all the equality that needs to go on in this country. We have 35 states that have signed it. They need 36. So can't we just get an executive order and somebody to do this? I'm just asking, you know, maybe somebody will hear me and it'll be a drop in the bucket and it'll, you know, spread like a water drop in the water. It'll just get out there and somebody will hear it and, hey, that'll be the right thing to do. Let's do that.
So,
you know,
go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. But that's where I was going with it. You know, just do the right thing. It's equal rights. It's equality. It puts everything in order.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I am confident that Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. Whether you could do the Equal Rights Amendment with an executive order, that seems tricky, because what you're actually trying to do is, with the Equal Rights Amendment, is have something in the Constitution that supersedes an executive order and even supersedes Congress. But getting that 36 states seems important. We're going to break, Angela, but thank you so much for your call. We'll be back. This is Thom Hartmann Show. Jean from Littleton, go ahead.
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to touch base with you. And, you know, I was one of the original women that were on those demonstration lines for Roe versus Wade.
Thank you.
And absolutely, and it breaks my heart that they just want to take this away from us. It is definitely our right. Having to have an abortion because a husband told me he would leave me with 2 small children if I didn't really makes it even worse for women. We are in charge of our own bodies. But I just wanted to ask about the Alabama Senate. When these children are born with disabilities, either mental or physical, what are they going to do with them? They don't educate their children to begin with. What are they going to do with these children that have really bad medical needs? Are they just going to warehouse them someplace?
If you look at most measures of results that we care about in communities, Alabama scores low, and they simultaneously have a governmental apparatus that doesn't seem to be data-driven, doesn't seem to be motivated to change those results. In my desire, maybe our shared desire to have a united nation, to have a country that comes together, quoting Barack Obama, not just red states of America and blue states of America, but a United States of America. There is maybe a desire to miss a key point, and I think that key point is that certainly since the Nixon administration, there has been an explicit move to try to Southernify American government, to try to have that condition, the condition of larger wealth disparities, the condition of greater subjugation, take hold elsewhere. I don't know what Alabama is going to do. What I'm confident about is that they're wrong. That doesn't mean everybody who lives in Alabama is wrong, but all I'm sure of, Jean, is that their government is wrong. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have a president that makes fun of a journalist that had a disability. And it was all over our TV during his election. I mean, I worked in healthcare for 35 years. I've seen children with disabilities. They require a lot of attention and a lot of medical attention and just compassion, love, and teaching. So that's a big concern for me. And it is my right to have an abortion. Absolutely. It's my body. I mean, if men were more responsible with, even in a perfectly good marriage, if men were more responsible with using a condom or making sure birth control was used, women wouldn't be in a lot of this position. But I did work with young women they were 16, 15 years old. They were sophomores and juniors in high school. And I wouldn't want to do that to a young girl. I mean, education is an important thing in our society, and it just it upsets their whole life. And just being a woman that had to do that for my husband, or with the threat of leaving, that was very heart-wrenching. And, I'm 66 years old, and it still tears me up. So I really think we need to get back out there again and make sure we keep our rights as women.
And, Jean, do you think this might be a chance? I heard this when I was in college, that there is, and I'm not prepared to call it a silver lining, but that one potential result of Alabama doing this is that a new generation of human beings, including women and trans Americans, will recognize this as not an ancillary issue, but as a defining issue in the United States, where a majority of the United States is in fact with you.
Right.
Maybe not a majority of Alabama legislators, maybe not a majority of Alabama voters, but a majority of U.S. voters are with you. Do you think this is a chance, an opportunity for a bunch more people to wake up?
Oh, I sure hope so. I sure hope so. I pray every day that more people, men and women, wake up to really realize that our government has become such a fascist government.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your call. Going to Linda in Matlock, Washington. Linda, thank you so much for listening on KBCS.
Hi. I'd like to throw in another little aspect, because you said that timing is very critical here. Looking at this historically, this is like the religious right's last stand. They realize that as America is becoming less religiosity, less marriage-centered, they realize that they have got to deliver the goods to these evangelicals who have been following them for the last 40, 45 years. And so I see not only the Alabama law as trying to put the stake in the heart of Roe v. Wade, they have to pay off their religious right, because otherwise they will not have a party probably in about another 10, 15 years, because America is becoming less religious. And also I see it tied into our foreign policy in that a lot of these apocalyptic end-timers, the Revelation crowd, they want a payoff. And whether it be the end of Roe v. Wade or whether it be the kicking off of some kind of worldwide conflict in the Middle East where sci-fi Jesus shows up and takes them all away, they want a payoff. And this is their way of saying we're going to have a payoff. So, and as a former nurse that worked at Planned Parenthood, we also had a DSHS contract for taking care of children that were in the juvenile system. And I had worked with 13-year-old prostitutes who only had a box of Lucky Charms in their housing situation.
Yeah.
So it is, I just see it as being, they're reaching out, and they've only got just a very, very narrow margin, and the demographics are changing. The millennials are now the biggest potential voting bloc, and Generation Z, they are so progressive. They are very inclusive. They have grown up in a world where LGBTQ community, you have friends. I mean, I have a friend couple that lives down the road from us, and he turned around and he says, we're gay. I says, I know. And it's like, we're okay. Everybody's okay with it.
I hadn't thought of it. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just think this is the Republican Party saying, okay, these are the only voters we've got left, so we have to pay off.
I hadn't thought of it as a last chance, because I have yet to see the transformation of the Republican Party and have yet to see a full repudiation with multiple election cycles in a row. One midterm election, one congressional election is not yet a trend. To demonstrate that it is a last chance, I do see the payoff point and really appreciate your call. We'll be back. This is Tom's Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Call the numbers 202-808-9925. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks for being you.
For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over it in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947. It became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmortified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Nobody is saying that this is easy. Nobody of the legions of people who are lifting their voice to decry Alabama's decision to pass the most restrictive anti-abortion laws in the country. No one is saying that this stuff is easy. The callers today who have been willing to share their own stories of their own difficult choices, none of them said this was easy. In fact, much of the point is this is not easy. This is hard. This is a place where the application of criminal law, the application of criminal punishment, the application of force by government, this is not the ambit of governmental force, the application of criminal law. The question before the legislature is not whether or not one views abortion to be a sin. The question before the legislature is whether or not abortion should be a crime. If you ask that question, even of people with different religious backgrounds, different levels of awareness about the freedoms of people who become pregnant and who have the capacity to become pregnant, still the majority of people say, oh, I don't know if it should be a crime. We can have a discussion about the ways that it's hard, but when it should happen, when it shouldn't happen, who should make that choice, who should be involved in making that choice. But ultimately, it is one person's choice, and that is the person who is pregnant. And the application of that choice, should the application of that choice be a crime? We're not saying that choice is easy. We're saying that it shouldn't be the ambit of government, and that if freedom means anything other than a false talking point by people who really just want to subjugate by race, who want to subjugate by religion, who want to subjugate by sex and gender, who want to subjugate by economics, for people who believe that freedom is anything, if that's a word of inspiration, if that is a word of value, if that is the kind of thing we would be willing to fight revolutions for, it's got to include the essential freedoms of women, of trans people who can become pregnant, who get pregnant. We're taking your calls. Science. Diane wants to talk about it from Tampa, Florida. Go ahead, Diane.
9-month warranty. Once the baby's born, you're on your own. And these are just a few statistics. There are 530 children that died in the first year of birth in Georgia because there was no health care for them. We have in Alabama, there's 37.2 babies' deaths for 100,000 born. It's worse than Uzbekistan. Now, Alabama's competing with China and Oman for being the worst. 530 children died before their first birthday. So, and these people, they don't care if they get prenatal care. They don't care if the mothers live or the babies die. All they care about is having them born to punish women for having sex and getting pregnant.
Yeah, I hope it's not lost on too many people. I'm almost sick and bored of the hypocrisy argument, but not because it's not important, but just because it's so very frequent. But I hope it's not lost on people what you said. I hope you understand the absurd that the very same legislators who are trying to say this is somehow for them, not about women, it's about an unborn fetus. It is about children in some way. That please look at their voting records on WIC. Please look at their voting records on support for early education. Please look at their voting records for budgets that will make sure that children born and for families who are struggling actually have a chance at a decent life. Please look at their records when they say they're pro-life on what circumstances under which they would kill somebody and under what circumstances they would say the state should be ordered to kill somebody. If they say they're pro-freedom and pro-life, they are lying. And that lie has to become more plain. I'm sorry I got upset. Go ahead.
No, and what I'm pointing out, and if you go to a map of the death rates and the maternal rates, you'll see the states that have the highest are the ones that we're talking about. There's no hospitals. They're closing hospitals. They haven't expanded Medicaid, so these women, by the time they get to the hospital, a lot of times they've already bled to death. And then you have two choices. You have infants dying, or you